Eli Navarro was just trying to grab lunch between construction jobs when he saw the woman choking at the corner table. One quick Heimlich maneuver later, she was breathing again. He expected a simple thank you and nothing more. What he got was Aurelia Langford showing up at his apartment door the next morning with homemade pie and the most unusual job offer of his life. Turns out the woman he saved wasn't just wealthy. She was a billionaire hiding from scandal, looking for someone real in a world full of fake people. She offered him work as her personal driver while she rebuilt her reputation from the ground up. For a struggling single dad, barely making rent, it seemed like a miracle. But as their two very different worlds collided, neither expected what would happen next. What could possibly go wrong when a broke father meets a woman with everything to lose? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning alarm never had a chance to ring. Eli Navarro's internal clock had been set to 5:30 for the better part of 15 years, ever since Sophie was born, and sleep became a luxury he couldn't afford. The small apartment on Maple Street held the gentle quiet that comes just before dawn, when the world still belongs to early risers and insomniacs. He padded to the kitchen in worn slippers, the floorboards creaking their familiar morning song. The coffee maker gurgled to life as he opened the refrigerator, surveying their modest supplies with the practiced eye of a man who'd learned to stretch every dollar. 2 eggs left, half a loaf of bread, and enough milk for Sophie's cereal. It would do. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen next door starting her own morning routine. The elderly woman had been their neighbor for 3 years now, and her predictable schedule had become oddly comforting. In a life full of uncertainties, small consistencies mattered. Eli's reflection caught him in the kitchen window, 42 years old with crow's feet that spoke of too many early mornings and late nights worrying about bills. His hands, permanently stained with traces of construction work, wrapped around his coffee mug like they were holding on to something precious. Because they were. This quiet moment, this stillness before the day, demanded everything from him, was his. The bedroom door down the hall opened with its characteristic squeak, and Sophie emerged in her favorite pajamas, the ones with little stars that were getting too small, but that she refused to give up. At 14, she was caught between childhood and something more complicated, but mornings still brought out the little girl in her. "Morning, Dad," she mumbled, her dark hair sticking up in directions that defied gravity. "Morning, sunshine. Oatmeal. Or cereal. Can we do pancakes?" Hope flickered in her voice, the kind of hope that came from being 14 and still believing in small miracles. Eli glanced at the clock. He had exactly 47 minutes before he needed to be at the job site, and pancakes would take at least 20. But Sophie had asked for so little lately, especially since the divorce papers were finalized and her mother moved to Sacramento with her new husband. Pancakes it is. The smile that spread across Sophie's face was worth being 5 minutes late. To work. As he mixed batter in a bowl that had seen better days, Sophie settled at their small kitchen table with her homework spread out like battle plans. She was working on an essay about her hero, and Eli could see her chewing the end of her pencil in the same way her mother used to when she was thinking hard about something. "Who'd you pick for your hero essay?" he asked, flipping the first pancake, with the dexterity that came from years of practice. "You," she said without looking up, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. The spatula nearly slipped from his hand. "Me? Yeah. You work hard, you take care of me, and you always make pancakes when I ask." She looked up then, and her eyes held a wisdom that sometimes startled him. "Plus, you saved that lady yesterday." The lady. Eli had almost forgotten about the incident at Murphy's Cafe the day before. He'd been grabbing a quick sandwich between jobs when he saw a well-dressed woman at the corner table suddenly clutch her throat, her eyes wide with panic. Training from his volunteer EMT days kicked in, and he'd performed the Heimlich maneuver. Without thinking twice, The piece of food dislodged, the woman could breathe again, and Eli had quietly slipped out while she was still catching her breath, not wanting to make a fuss. That wasn't being a hero, Sophie. That was just being human. "Same thing sometimes," she said, and went back to her essay. After breakfast, they settled into their morning routine with the choreographed ease of two people who'd learned to depend on each other. Sophie packed her backpack while Eli made her lunch, adding a note to her brown bag like he'd done every school day since kindergarten. Today's note read, "Remember, you're braver than you believe and stronger than you seem. Love, Dad." The walk to Sophie's school took them through the older part of town, where tree-lined streets told stories of better times. They passed Mr. Morrison's house, where the elderly widower was already tending to his roses, and the corner store run by the Patel family, who always had a kind word and sometimes slipped Sophie an extra piece of candy. "Dad?" Sophie's voice carried that particular tone that meant she'd been thinking about something serious. "What's on your mind, kiddo? What if Mom asked me to come live with her in Sacramento?" The question hit Eli like a physical blow, but he kept walking, kept breathing, kept being the steady presence Sophie needed. They'd talked about this possibility before, but hearing it out loud in the crisp morning air made it feel more real, more threatening. "Do you want to live with your mum?" he asked carefully. Sophie kicked at a fallen leaf, sending it skittering across the sidewalk. "I don't know. Sometimes I miss her, but this is home, you know, and you need me." The honesty in her voice broke his heart a little. She was 14, worrying about taking care of him when it should be the other way around. But that was Sophie, old soul wrapped in teenage awkwardness, seeing things that adults sometimes missed. "I do need you," he admitted. "But Sophie, you don't have to worry about taking care of me. That's my job, remember?" "I know, but we're a team, right? Like you always say." "The best team," he confirmed, stopping to give her a quick hug before they reached the school gates. The construction site was already buzzing with activity when Eli arrived 15 minutes later. He'd been working with the same crew for 3 years now, and they'd developed the easy camaraderie that comes from shared sweat and honest work. Mike Torres, the foreman, waved him over to where the morning assignments were being distributed. "Navarro, you're on the 3rd floor today. Framing work." Mike handed him a hard hat that had seen better days. "Oh, and there's some fancy woman. Been asking around about you yesterday, said you helped her out or something." Eli's stomach tightened. "What kind of woman?" "The kind that doesn't usually visit construction sites," Mike said with a grin. "Expensive clothes, shiny car. Left her." "Card." He pulled a business card from his shirt pocket, and Eli's breath caught when he saw the elegant gold lettering. "Aurelia Langford, Chief Executive Officer, Langford Wellness International, the woman from the cafe." Eli turned the card over and found a handwritten note in flowing script. "Thank you for yesterday. I'd like to return the favor. Please call." "You gonna call her?" asked Tommy, one of the younger guys on the crew, peering over Eli's shoulder. "She looked like she had money." "Mind your own business, Tommy," Eli said, but not unkindly. He slipped the card into his wallet, where it seemed to burn like a small flame against his hip. The morning passed in the familiar rhythm of construction work, the satisfying sound of hammer against nail, the smell of fresh lumber, the easy banter of men who'd learned to trust each other 30 feet off the ground. But Eli found his mind wandering to the business card in his wallet and the woman who'd left it. During lunch break, he sat apart from the others, turning the card over in his hands. What could a woman like Aurelia Langford possibly want with him? He'd done what anyone would do in that situation. Well, what anyone with EMT training would do. It wasn't special, wasn't heroic, despite what Sophie thought. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Dad, forgot to tell you. Parent-teacher. Conference next Thursday at 4. Can you make it? Love you." Eli quickly calculated his schedule. Thursday was usually a half day on this job, so he could probably swing it if he talked to Mike. He texted back, "Wouldn't miss it. Love you too, sunshine. But as he typed the response, he was thinking, about money again. Always money. Sophie's school was talking about college prep courses next year, which meant additional fees. His truck needed new tires. The apartment's heater was making concerning noises as winter approached. The constant calculation of costs versus income was exhausting, a background hum of anxiety that never quite went silent. He looked at the business card again. What harm could one phone call do? That evening, after Sophie had finished her homework and settled in to watch one of her favorite shows, Eli found himself standing in the kitchen, staring at his phone. The business card lay on the counter next to it, the gold lettering catching the light from the overhead fixture. He dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. Aurelia Langford. Her voice was crisp, professional, but he could hear something else underneath. A thread of hope, maybe. Ms. Langford, this is Eli Navarro. You left your card at my job site. Eli. The change in her tone was immediate, warming. I'm so glad you called. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, he admitted. I'm still not sure why you wanted. Me too. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. Would you be willing to meet me tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Something that might be mutually beneficial. I work until 5. Perfect. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street. Grounded. Do you know it? Eli knew it. It was one of those places that charged $5 for coffee and had Wi-Fi passwords written on chalkboards, not exactly his usual hangout. I can find it. Thank you, Eli. Really. I'll see you at 5:30. After he hung up, Eli stood in his kitchen for a long moment, listening to the familiar sounds of his life, Sophie's laughter from the living room, Mrs. Chen's television through the wall, the hum of the refrigerator that was probably on its last legs. Tomorrow he would step into a different world, if only for an hour. The thought terrified and intrigued him in equal measure. Sophie appeared in the doorway, drawn by some sixth sense that teenagers possess. Everything okay, Dad? Just fine, kiddo, just fine. But as he said it, Eli wondered if anything would ever be just fine again, or if fine was about to become something entirely different. The business card seemed to shimmer on the counter, a golden bridge to possibilities he couldn't quite imagine. Outside, the first leaves of autumn were beginning to fall, and change was in the air, whether he was ready for it or not. Grounded coffee was exactly what Eli had expected. Exposed brick walls, Edison bulb lighting, and the kind of carefully curated shabby chic aesthetic that cost more to achieve than actual shabbiness. He arrived 5 minutes early, partly from habit and partly from nerves, and chose a table near the back where he could watch the door. When Aurelia Langford walked in at exactly 5:30, every conversation in the cafe seemed to pause for a heartbeat. She moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder if she belonged somewhere, but Eli noticed the way her eyes swept the room, calculating, cautious. When her gaze found his, her entire demeanor softened. Eli, she said, extending her hand as she approached. Thank you for coming. Up close, in better lighting than the cafe where he'd saved her, Eli could see that she was probably in her late 30s, with the kind of polished beauty that spoke of excellent health care and no financial stress. But there were lines around her eyes that suggested she hadn't bought her way out of all of life's difficulties. Miss Langford. He stood to shake her hand, noting the firmness of her grip, the callus on her right index finger that suggested she actually worked despite her obvious wealth. Please call me Aurelia, and may I? She gestured to the chair across from him. As she settled in, Eli noticed she'd chosen clothes that were expensive but understated. Dark jeans, a cream-colored sweater, boots that probably cost more than his monthly grocery budget but didn't scream it. Someone trying to fit in, or at least not stand out. Can I get you something to drink? She asked, already signaling the barista. Just coffee. Black. She ordered for both of them, his coffee and something complicated involving oat milk and cinnamon, that made the young barista's eyes light up with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for customers who tipped well. I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here, Aurelia said, once they were alone again. The thought had crossed my mind. She smiled at that, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to something warmer, more approachable. I like that you don't waste words. Can't afford to, usually. The comment hung in the air between them, and Eli immediately regretted it. He wasn't trying to make her feel guilty about her wealth, but the difference in their circumstances was impossible to ignore. That's actually part of why I wanted to talk to you, she said, surprising him. Eli, what you did yesterday, helping me when I was choking, most people wouldn't have acted so quickly. And when I tried to thank you afterward, you were already gone. It wasn't a big deal. It was to me. Her voice carried a weight that made him look at her more carefully. I've been in the public eye for most of my adult life, and I can count. On one hand, the number of people who've helped me without wanting something in return. The barista brought their drinks, and Aurelia wrapped her hands around her mug like she was drawing warmth from it. I run a wellness company, Langford Wellness International. We have locations in 43 countries and employ over 15,000 people. Eli nodded politely, though the numbers meant little to him beyond very rich. 3 weeks ago, a former employee went to the press with allegations that our supplements contain undisclosed ingredients. The allegations are false, but the damage to our reputation has been significant. She took a sip of her drink, and Eli could see her choosing her words carefully. I'm taking a leave of absence while my legal team handles the situation, staying out of the public eye until this blows over. I'm sorry to hear that, Eli said, and meant it. He'd seen what rumors could do to good people. The thing is, I need help. I need someone I can trust, someone who isn't part of my usual world. Someone who helped a stranger without thinking about what he might get out of it. Eli felt the conversation shifting in a direction that made him uncomfortable. What kind of help? I need a driver. Someone to help me get around the city without attracting attention. Someone who can handle himself if the media gets too aggressive. She leaned forward slightly. Someone real. I work construction, I know, and I'm willing to work around your schedule. The pay would be substantial. She slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Eli opened it and nearly choked on his coffee. The number written there was more than he made in 3 months. That's weekly, she said quietly. Eli stared at the paper, his mind immediately calculating what that money could mean. Sophie's college fund? New tires for the truck? Hell, a new truck. The heater fixed, maybe even a down payment on a small house in a better neighborhood. Why me? He asked. Because when you saw me choking, you didn't see a business opportunity or a chance to get close to money. You saw a person who needed help and you helped. No questions, no agenda. She paused. And because yesterday was the first time in months that someone looked at me like I was human instead of a headline. There was something in her voice that made Eli look up from the paper. Loneliness, maybe, or exhaustion. He recognized it because he'd seen it in his own mirror often enough. What would this job actually involve? Driving me to meetings mostly, some errands, keeping an eye out for photographers who might be following us. Nothing dangerous, just protective. I need someone I can depend on. I don't know anything about your world. That's exactly why I need you. Eli folded the paper and handed it back to her. I can't. The disappointment that flashed across her face was quickly masked, but he'd seen it. May I ask why? Because I don't understand what you're really asking for, and that much money always comes with strings attached. I can't afford to get tangled up in something I don't understand. Aurelia was quiet for a long moment, studying him with those sharp eyes. You have a daughter. It wasn't a question, and Eli's defenses immediately went up. How do you mentioned her yesterday briefly, and there was a photo in your wallet when you pulled out your EMT card. Eli's hand instinctively went to his back pocket. He'd forgotten showing his certification to the paramedics who'd arrived after he'd helped her. I'm not threatening your daughter, Aurelia said quickly, reading his expression. I'm saying I understand why you'd be cautious. But Eli, I'm not offering you charity. I need someone I can trust, and trust is worth paying for. You don't know me. I know you saved my life and walked away without asking for anything. I know you're a single father working construction to support your daughter. I know you care more about doing the right thing than doing the profitable thing. She leaned back in her chair. In my experience, that's rarer than you might think. Eli looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected. Fear. This woman who commanded corporate empires and employed thousands was scared, not of him, but of something bigger. What aren't you telling me? He asked. A smile ghosted across her lips. Several things, but nothing that would put you or your daughter in danger. I promise you that. Your promises don't mean much to me yet. Fair enough. She pulled out her phone and showed him something on the screen. This was taken outside my apartment building yesterday morning. The photo showed Aurelia leaving a building, but the angle and quality suggested it had been taken with a telephoto lens from a significant distance. Someone had been watching her. The media attention isn't just professional interest, she said. Some of these photographers are aggressive, persistent. I need someone who can handle that kind of pressure. Eli studied the photo, noting the timestamp, just hours after their encounter at the cafe. Have you considered hiring professional security? I have security for my home and office, but security draws attention. Security says this person has something to hide. A driver, especially one who doesn't look like typical hired muscle, is invisible. She had a point. Eli certainly didn't look like someone who belonged in Aurelia Langford's world, which was apparently exactly what she wanted. I'd need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. She stood to leave, then paused. Eli, can I ask you something? He nodded. When you helped me yesterday, in that moment when you realized I was in trouble, what went through your mind? The question caught him off guard. Nothing really. I just acted. Exactly. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. That's what I need. Someone who acts on instinct instead of calculation. After she left, Eli sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, staring at the folded paper she'd left on the table, with her phone number. The money was tempting, more than tempting, but he'd learned long ago that nothing good came from decisions made purely from desperation. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Dad, Mrs. Patterson wants to talk about my math grades. Are you coming to the conference? He texted back quickly. Wouldn't miss it. Everything okay? Yeah, just need to work harder. Love you. As he walked back to his truck, Eli thought about Sophie's casual mention of working harder, about the way she never asked for things they couldn't afford, about the careful way she'd been rationing her art supplies to make them last longer. She deserved more than careful rationing and constant worry about money, but she also deserved a father who made smart decisions, not desperate ones. At home, Sophie was at the kitchen table working on her hero essay, the same assignment she'd mentioned that morning. She looked up when he came in, and he could see her trying to read his expression. How was your meeting? She asked. Interesting, he said honestly. Someone offered me a job. A different job? A second job, part-time. Sophie's eyes lit up with the kind of hope that made his chest tight. Good money? Very good money. But, he smiled at her perceptiveness, but it's complicated. Most good things are, she said, sounding far older than 14. What's the job? Driver for a businesswoman. She needs someone reliable. Sophie studied his face with those two wise eyes. And you're worried because rich people don't usually hire construction workers as drivers unless something weird is going on. Something like that. Dad? Sophie's voice was careful, the way it got when she was about to say something important. I know money's tight. I know you worry about it, but we're okay, you know? We're doing okay. The generosity in her voice, this kid who was doing without so many things telling him they were okay, nearly broke his heart. I know we are, kiddo. But okay and good are different things. Yeah, she said softly. They are. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Eli sat at his kitchen table with the business card in front of him and his laptop open to search results for Aurelia Langford. The woman who'd asked for his help was even more successful than she'd indicated. Langford Wellness International was indeed a global empire, and Aurelia herself was worth an estimated $800 million. The recent scandal was real too. Headlines about contaminated supplements and FDA investigations filled the first several pages of search results. But buried deeper, Eli found older articles that painted a different picture. A woman who'd built her company from nothing after her father's death, who donated millions to health initiatives in developing countries, who'd been named one of the most ethical CEOs in America 3 years running. Either she was very good at public relations, or she was exactly what she appeared to be. Someone who'd built something meaningful and was now watching it get torn down by accusations she claimed were false. Eli closed the laptop and picked up the business card one more time. In the kitchen's overhead light, the gold lettering seemed to shimmer with possibility. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to trust a billionaire who'd asked for his help, or to keep living the safe, careful life he'd built for himself. And Sophie, he thought about what Sophie had said, that most good things were complicated. As he turned off the lights and headed to bed, Eli wondered if maybe it was time to stop avoiding complications and start embracing them. After all, the last time he'd acted on instinct instead of calculation, he'd saved someone's life. Maybe it was time to see what else that instinct might lead to. Eli called Aurelia at 7 in the morning before he could change his mind again. "I'll take the job," he said when she answered on the second ring. "But I have conditions." "I'm listening." Her voice was alert despite the early hour, and he wondered if she'd been awake waiting for his call. "My construction job comes first. I can't afford to lose steady work for something temporary. And my daughter, she doesn't get involved in any of this. Whatever's going on with your business, it stays away from her." "Agreed. Completely agreed. And I want to understand exactly what I'm getting into. No surprises." There was a pause. "Some things I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me this afternoon? I'll show you what the job actually entails." An hour later, Eli found himself standing outside a downtown office building that reached toward the sky like a glass and steel monument to success. The lobby was all marble and modern art, with security guards who looked like they could bench press his truck. A woman at the reception desk directed him to the elevator with the kind of polite smile that suggested she was paid well to make everyone feel welcome while remembering exactly who belonged and who didn't. The elevator rose so smoothly, he barely felt the movement until his ears popped somewhere around the 30th floor. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world that existed in a different orbit from anything he'd ever experienced. Aurelia's office took up a corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city spread. Out below, like a detailed map, the furniture was elegant but not ostentatious, clean lines, natural materials. Everything arranged to suggest power without screaming about it. "You made it," Aurelia said, rising from behind a desk that probably cost more than his annual salary. She was dressed more formally today, a navy suit that was clearly tailored specifically for her, but her smile was the same warm expression he remembered from the coffee shop. "Impressive office," Eli said, looking around. "It's borrowed. My huge office is in the building where the protests are happening." She gestured toward the windows. "Come look." Eli joined her at the windows, and she pointed to a building several blocks away where he could just make out a small crowd gathered on the sidewalk. "My employees, former employees rather. They're convinced I've poisoned half the country with tainted supplements." "Have you?" The directness of the question seemed to surprise her. Then she laughed, a genuine sound that filled the quiet office. "No, but I can't blame them for believing it. The evidence that's been presented is convincing, even though it's fake, especially because it's fake. Whoever did this knew exactly how to make it look real." She turned away from the window. "I want to show you something." She led him to a conference table, where several folders were spread out like evidence in a trial. These are the lab reports that were leaked to the media. They show contamination in 3 of our most popular products, contamination that could cause the symptoms people have been reporting. Eli picked up one of the reports, though the technical language might as well have been written in a foreign language. And these are fake. The reports are real. The contamination they describe actually happened, but not in our products. Aurelia opened another folder. These are the same tests run on the actual products we shipped. Clean, no contamination. So someone contaminated different products and then labeled them as yours? That's what we think. Someone with access to our packaging, our lot numbers, our shipping information. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look like we were responsible. Eli studied the paperwork, beginning to understand the scope of what had been done to her. Inside job? Has to be. The question is who and why and how do we prove it without looking like we're making excuses? A knock on the door interrupted them, and a man in an expensive suit entered without waiting for permission. He was younger than Eli, maybe early 30s, with the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never having been told no. "Aurelia, we need to discuss the board meeting tomorrow," he said, then stopped when he noticed Eli. "I wasn't aware you had company." "Marcus, this is Eli Navarro. Eli, my assistant, Marcus Stone." Marcus extended his hand with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Navarro, are you with the legal team?" "No," Eli said simply, not offering any additional information. The silence stretched until Aurelia filled it. "Eli is going to be helping me with some personal matters while we deal with this crisis." "I see." Marcus's expression suggested he didn't see at all and didn't approve of what he was imagining. "Well, about tomorrow's board meeting. We can discuss that later, Marcus. Could you give us some privacy?" After Marcus left, closing the door with slightly more force than necessary, Aurelia shook her head. "He means well, but he's been even. More protective than usual since this whole thing started. How long has he worked for you?" 3 years. He's brilliant at his job, but he has very strong opinions about who I should and shouldn't trust." She gathered up the folders. "Speaking of trust, are you ready to see what your job would actually look like?" They took the elevator down to the parking garage, where Aurelia led him to a black sedan that managed to be both luxurious and understated. "This would be your car," she said, holding up a set of keys. "It's registered to a subsidiary company. Not directly to me, less likely to attract attention." Eli ran his hand along the car's smooth surface. The vehicle probably cost more than he'd made in the past 2 years combined. "Where exactly would I be driving you?" "Meetings, mostly. Some at lawyers' offices, some with private investigators, some with board members who are still willing to meet with me." She opened the driver's door. "Want to try it out?" The interior was all leather and technology, with more buttons and screens than seemed necessary for the simple act of getting from one place to another. But when Eli started the engine, it purred to life with the kind of smooth power that made his old truck seem like a child's toy. "Where to?" he asked. "Let's just drive. I want to show you what we're up against." For the next hour, Aurelia directed him through the city while explaining the scope of her problems. The media attention was relentless. Photographers stationed outside her home, reporters calling her friends and family, tabloids running stories about her personal life that ranged from merely invasive to completely fabricated. "Yesterday, they ran a story claiming I'm dating a foreign diplomat," she said as they stopped at a red light. "They even had photos, except the man in the pictures is my cousin's husband at a family wedding 6 months ago. Why don't you just issue a statement correcting it? Because every response feeds the story. The goal is to stay quiet until my legal team can prove the contamination claims are false. Then we can address everything else." As if summoned by their conversation, a motorcycle pulled up beside them at the next red light. The rider was holding a camera with a telephoto lens, and Eli could see him trying to get a clear shot through the car's windows. "Friend of yours?" Eli asked. "Hardly." Aurelia slumped down in her seat. This is what I mean about needing protection. The light turned green, and the motorcycle stayed with them through 3 turns before finally giving up and roaring off in a different direction. Eli found himself checking the mirrors more frequently, noting which cars stayed with them too long, which pedestrians seemed too interested in their vehicle. "You're already thinking like security," Aurelia observed. "I'm thinking like someone who doesn't want his picture in tomorrow's paper." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, and Eli found himself relaxing into the rhythm of navigating the city's traffic. The car handled beautifully, and despite everything Aurelia had told him about media attention and business scandals, there was something peaceful about this simple act of driving with no particular destination in mind. "Can I ask you something?" Aurelia said, as they merged onto the highway that would take them back toward downtown. "Sure." "What changed your mind about taking the job?" Eli considered the question as he changed lanes to pass a slow-moving truck. "My daughter. She's 14 and she's already started talking about college. I want to be able to say yes when she asks for things instead of always calculating whether we can afford it." "That's it? That's enough." Aurelia nodded slowly. "I built my company for similar reasons. My father died when I was 25, and he left behind a lot of medical debt. I wanted to make sure other families didn't have to choose between healthcare and financial security. Is that what the wellness company does? It's what it's supposed to do. We make supplements and health products accessible to people who can't afford traditional healthcare. Everything we sell costs less than the pharmaceutical equivalent." Her voice carried a passion that hadn't been there when she was discussing business strategies. "At least that's what we were doing before someone decided to destroy us." They were pulling back into the parking garage when Eli's phone rang. Sophie's school number. "I need to take this," he said, parking the car and answering quickly. "Hello, Mr. Navarro. This is Principal Martinez from Sophie's school. She's fine, but there's been an incident." Eli's heart rate spiked. "What kind of incident?" "Some other students were teasing her about something they saw online. She got upset, and there was a small altercation. Nothing serious, but we'd like you to come in if possible." "I'm on my way." Eli hung up and turned to Aurelia, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand something was wrong. "Go," she said immediately. "Your daughter comes first. I'm sorry, Don't apologize. This is exactly why I knew you were the right person for this job." She handed him the car keys. "Take the car, bring it back tomorrow." "I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will." Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from making decisions worth millions of dollars. "Go take care of Sophie." As Eli drove the luxurious sedan toward Sophie's school, he couldn't help but think that maybe Aurelia Langford wasn't quite what he'd expected. The woman who'd just handed him the keys to a car worth more than his house, because his daughter needed him, was either very good at manipulation or she was exactly what she appeared to be. Either way, he was about to find out which one was true. Sophie was sitting in the principal's office with her arms crossed and a defiant expression that reminded Eli painfully of her mother. Her dark hair was disheveled, and there was a small scrape on her knuckle that made his protective instincts flare. "Dad," she said when she saw him, and the relief in her voice was unmistakable. Principal Martinez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen every possible teenage crisis, gestured for Eli to sit down. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Mr. Navarro. What happened?" Some students found an old news article online about Sophie's mother's divorce proceedings. They were making comments about the custody arrangements, and Sophie, well, she defended herself. Eli looked at his daughter, who was staring at her hands in her lap. "Sophie, they said you couldn't take care of me. That Mom left because you're a loser who can't even afford a decent apartment." Her voice was quiet but fierce. "I told them they didn't know what they were talking about. And then?" Sophie's defiance cracked slightly. "And then Jessica Morrison said maybe Mom was right to leave, and that's when I..." I might have pushed her. Principal Martinez intervened gently. It was a very minor physical altercation. No one was hurt, but our policy requires parent notification for any physical contact between students. Eli felt the familiar weight of being a single parent, the constant awareness that Sophie's behavior would be scrutinized more carefully, because she didn't have the stability of a traditional two-parent home. I understand. What happens now? Normally this would result in a one-day suspension, but given the circumstances, the personal nature of what triggered Sophie's reaction, I'm willing to make this a warning if Sophie writes a letter of apology to Jessica. I'll write the letter, Sophie said immediately, but I'm not sorry for defending Dad. Sophie, Eli started. You work 2 jobs to take care of me. You never miss a school event. You help me with homework every night, even when you're exhausted. She looked up at him with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. They don't get to say you're a loser. The fierce loyalty in her voice made Eli's chest tight. He reached over and squeezed her shoulder. Thank you for defending me, kiddo. But next time, use words instead of hands, okay? Okay. After they'd sorted out the paperwork and Sophie had reluctantly agreed to write the apology letter, Eli walked her out to the parking lot. She stopped short when she saw the black sedan. Dad, whose car is that? It's complicated. Sophie walked around the vehicle, taking in the sleek lines and obvious expense. This is the job, isn't it? The one you were telling me about? Part of it. Dad. Sophie's voice carried that particular tone that meant she was about to say something important. I know I acted like a brat in there, but I meant what I said. You're not a loser. You're the best dad in the world. And if this job can make things easier for us, then I'm happy about it. Even if it means spending time around rich people? Sophie grinned, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all day. Especially if it means spending time around rich people, maybe I'll learn something useful. The drive home was quiet, with Sophie occasionally commenting on the car's features, with the kind of fascination that only a teenager could bring to luxury technology. When they pulled into their apartment complex, Eli was acutely aware of how the sedan looked parked next to rusty pickup trucks and aging sedans. Will you have to dress differently for this job? Sophie asked, as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. Why? Because you look like a construction worker who borrowed someone else's car. Eli looked down at his worn jeans and work boots. Thanks for the fashion advice. I'm serious, Dad. If you're going to be driving around someone important, shouldn't you look the part? She had a point, though Eli wasn't sure he owned anything that would qualify as appropriate attire for chauffeuring a billionaire. His one good suit was 10 years old and had been purchased for court appearances during the divorce proceedings. That evening, after Sophie had finished her homework and gone to bed, Eli found himself standing in front of his closet trying to figure out what someone in his new position was supposed to wear. He was still contemplating this problem when his phone rang. Eli, it's Aurelia. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all. Sophie's asleep. How is she? Is everything all right? At school? The genuine concern in her voice surprised him. She's fine, just some kids being kids. I'm sorry. I know how protective you are of her. There was something in Aurelia's tone that suggested she understood that protectiveness from personal experience. Can I ask you something? Eli said. Of course. Do you have children? The silence stretched long enough that Eli wondered if he'd crossed a line. When Aurelia finally answered, her voice was quieter. No, that wasn't something that worked out for me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. It's all right. It was a long time ago. She cleared her throat, returning to a more businesslike tone. I'm calling because I have a meeting tomorrow morning that I'd like you to drive me to. If you're still willing to take the job, I'm willing. What time? 9 o'clock. It's with my lawyer, so it should be straightforward. No media attention expected. What should I wear? Aurelia laughed, and the sound was warm enough to make him smile despite his embarrassment. Dark slacks? Nice shirt? Nothing? Are too formal. You're not trying to blend in at a country club. Just look professional." After they hung up, Eli spent an hour ironing his best shirt and trying to remember the last time he'd worried about making a good impression on anyone besides Sophie's teachers. The next morning brought an unexpected complication. Sophie emerged from her bedroom wearing a dress that Eli was fairly certain she'd outgrown months ago. "What's the occasion?" he asked. "I want to meet her." "Meet who?" "The woman you're working for, Aurelia Langford." Eli nearly dropped his coffee mug. "Sophie, no, absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because this is work, not social hour, and because I specifically told her that you wouldn't be involved in any of this." Sophie sat down at the kitchen table with the determined expression that meant she'd already made up her mind about something. "Dad, you're going to be spending a lot of time with this woman. Don't you think I should at least know what she's like?" "Sophie, what if she's horrible? What if she's mean to you? What if she's one of those rich people who thinks poor people are stupid?" The protectiveness in her voice reminded Eli of the day before, when she'd been ready to fight anyone who criticized him. "Kiddo, I appreciate you looking out for me, but this isn't something you need to worry about." "I'm not worried, I'm curious." Sophie took a bite of cereal and studied him over her spoon. "Plus, if you're going to be her driver, she's probably going to ask about me eventually. Wouldn't it be better if she actually knew me instead of just knowing that you have a teenage daughter?" Eli had to admit she had a point. Aurelia had already shown interest in Sophie's well-being, and trying to keep his daughter completely separate from his work life might prove more difficult than he'd anticipated. "One meeting," he said finally. "Brief introduction, and then you go to school like normal." "Deal." An hour later, Eli pulled the sedan up to the curb outside Aurelia's downtown apartment building, with Sophie in the passenger seat looking both nervous and excited. The building was exactly what he'd expected: elegant, expensive, and staffed by doormen who probably earned more than most people's monthly rent. Aurelia emerged from the lobby at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that managed to look both professional and approachable. When she saw Sophie in the car, her step faltered for just a moment before she approached the passenger side. "You must be Sophie," she said, as Eli rolled down the window. "I'm Aurelia." "Hi," Sophie said, suddenly shy in the face of actual wealth. "Dad said you needed help with something." "I do. Your father is doing me a tremendous favor." Aurelia leaned down to the window level, bringing herself to Sophie's height. "I hope you don't mind sharing him for a few hours each day." "Are you going to be nice to him?" The direct question made Eli cringe, but Aurelia answered it seriously. "I'm going to try to be. He's helping me through a difficult time, and I'm very grateful for it." Sophie studied Aurelia's face with the intensity that teenagers brought to evaluating adults. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded approvingly. "Okay then, Sophie," Eli said. "Shouldn't you be getting to school?" "Yeah, I should." She gathered her backpack and turned to Aurelia. "It was nice meeting you, Ms. Langford." "Aurelia. And it was very nice meeting you too, Sophie." After Sophie had gotten out and headed toward the school bus stop, Aurelia slid into the passenger seat. "She's lovely, Eli. You should be proud." "I am. She's also very protective of you. Sometimes I think she takes care of me more than I take care of her." Aurelia was quiet for a moment as Eli pulled into traffic. "That's not necessarily a bad thing. Children who learn to be protective of the people they love usually grow up to be exceptional adults." Something in her voice suggested she was speaking from experience, but before Eli could ask about it, she was directing him toward the law offices where her meeting was scheduled. As they drove through the morning traffic, Eli found himself relaxing into a routine that was beginning to feel almost natural. Aurelia was an easy passenger. She gave clear directions, didn't backseat drive, and seemed content to sit quietly when conversation wasn't needed. "Eli?" she said as they approached their destination. "Yeah? Thank you for letting me meet Sophie. I know you wanted to keep your work and family life separate," she insisted. "That kid has a mind of her own. I can see where she gets it from." The law office was in one of the older downtown buildings, all mahogany paneling and brass fixtures that spoke of established tradition and expensive hourly rates. Eli pulled up to the curb and started to get out to open Aurelia's door, but she waved him off. "I'm not that formal," she said with a smile. "I'll be about an hour." As Eli watched her disappear into the building, he realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, this job had stopped feeling like a temporary arrangement and started feeling like something that might actually work out. He just hoped he was right. 3 weeks into the job, Eli had developed a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Mornings were still devoted to construction work, but afternoons belonged to Aurelia's world of board meetings, legal consultations, and carefully orchestrated damage control. He'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated whether photographers were following them, how to use the building's service entrances when necessary, and which restaurants had private dining rooms where conversations couldn't be overheard. What surprised him most was how much he enjoyed the work. Not just the financial security it provided, but the intellectual challenge of staying one step ahead of people who were paid to be intrusive. It turned out that years of construction work had given him skills that translated well to protective driving, spatial awareness, quick decision-making, and the ability to spot potential problems before they became actual problems. Aurelia, 4. Her part had proven to be exactly what she'd claimed to be, someone who needed help and was grateful for it. She never made him feel like hired help, always said please and thank you, and had insisted that he call her by her first name after the first week. More importantly, she'd kept her word about not involving Sophie in the complexities of her business. Crisis. The morning everything changed started like any other. Eli dropped Sophie at school, spent 4 hours at the construction site, and then picked up Aurelia for an afternoon of meetings. But when he arrived at her apartment building, she was waiting on the sidewalk with a grim expression and a newspaper in her hand. "We have a problem," she said as soon as she got into the car. She handed him the newspaper, folded open to the business section. The headline read, "Langford Wellness, CEO's secret romance with blue-collar driver raises questions about her judgment." Below, the headline was a photo of Eli opening the car door for Aurelia outside the law office, taken with a telephoto lens that made the simple courtesy look intimate. A second photo showed them sitting in the car, apparently deep in conversation, though Eli remembered they'd been discussing the best route to avoid traffic. "How did they?" Eli started. "Someone's been following us more carefully than we realized." Aurelia's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Or someone tipped them off." Eli read the article quickly, feeling his stomach sink with each paragraph. The reporter had done his homework. He'd identified Eli by name, mentioned his construction job, his divorce, even Sophie's school. The article suggested that Aurelia's romantic entanglement with her driver showed questionable decision-making during a crisis that required clear-headed leadership. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid," Eli said, handing the paper. "Back to her, I know, and I'm sorry, I should have been more careful." "More careful about what?" "We haven't done anything wrong." "No, but perception matters in my business, especially now." Aurelia stared out the window at the city passing by. "The board meeting is in an hour. This story is going to come up. What do you want me to do?" "Take me to the meeting. After that—" She paused, and Eli could see her working through the implications. "After that, we may need to reconsider this arrangement." The board meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor of a downtown office building. Eli waited in the car, but through the building's windows he could see figures gesturing animatedly around a large table. The meeting ran long, nearly 3 hours instead of the scheduled one, and when Aurelia finally emerged, her face was pale but determined. "How did it go?" Eli asked as she settled into the passenger seat. "About as well as expected. The board is concerned about my judgment. They're questioning whether I should remain as CEO while this crisis continues." Because of a newspaper article? Because of everything. The contamination scandal, the media attention, and now this. She gestured vaguely at the newspaper. There, worried that I'm becoming a liability to the company. Eli drove in silence for several minutes, processing what she'd told him. What happens if they remove you as CEO? I lose control of the company I built. Someone else makes decisions about the direction we take, the people we serve, the principles we operate by. Her voice was steady, but Eli could hear the pain underneath. 20 years of work gone because someone spread lies about contaminated supplements? Because someone is very good at destroying reputations and I haven't been good enough at protecting mine. They were stopped at a red light when Eli made a decision that surprised them both. Instead of heading toward Aurelia's apartment as usual, he turned toward the older part of the city. "Where are we going?" Aurelia asked. "Somewhere you can think." Clearly. 15 minutes later, he pulled into the parking lot of Murphy's Cafe, the same place where they'd first met. The lunch rush was over, and the cafe was nearly empty except for a few customers with laptops and coffee cups. "Why here?" Aurelia asked as they found a table in the back corner. "Because this is where it started. Maybe it's a good place to figure out how it should continue." They ordered coffee and sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon light filter through the cafe's front windows. It was Aurelia who finally spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said the first day we met. About not understanding. My world, you were right. I don't think I understand it anymore either." "What do you mean?" When I started the company, it was simple. Make good products, help people, build something meaningful. Somewhere along the way, it became about stock prices and board meetings and managing public perception. She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "I used to know exactly why I was doing what I was doing. Now I'm not sure I remember." Eli studied her face, noting the exhaustion that had been building over the past few weeks. "What would happen if you just told the truth? All of it? The contamination, the investigation, whoever's behind it? I'd look like I was making excuses, and without proof of who's sabotaging us, it would just sound like paranoid conspiracy theories. Do you have any proof?" Aurelia was quiet for a long moment. "Some. Not enough." "What kind of proof?" She looked around the cafe, ensuring they couldn't be overheard. "Financial records showing payments to the lab that produced the fake contamination reports. Security footage from our warehouse that shows someone accessing product samples who shouldn't have been there. Communication records that suggest coordination between the initial whistleblower and certain board members." That sounds like enough. To me, it's all circumstantial, and pursuing it would mean accusing people with significant power and influence of criminal activity. If I'm wrong, or if I can't prove it conclusively, it destroys what's left of my credibility. Eli leaned back in his chair, thinking about what she'd told him. Who benefits if you're removed as CEO? Several people. Competitors who want to acquire the company. Board members who think they could run it better. Anyone who's invested in our failure rather than our success, and the person who's been feeding information to reporters. Aurelia's expression darkened. "That's what I need to figure out. Someone close to me has been sharing details that should be confidential. Someone I trusted." Her phone buzzed with a text message, and when she read it, her face went pale. "What is it?" "Marcus. He says there are reporters outside my apartment building asking about our relationship. They want a statement about whether my personal life is affecting my professional judgment." Eli felt a familiar surge of protective anger. "Let me handle them." "Eli, no. This is exactly what we can't do. If you confront reporters on my behalf, it just confirms their narrative about us. So, what do you want to do?" Aurelia stared out the cafe window for a long moment. "I want to find out who's been feeding them information, and I want to prove that someone is systematically destroying my company." She looked back at him. "But I can't ask you to be part of that. It's going to get messier before it gets better." "You're not asking. I'm offering. Eli, someone attacked you, and now they're coming after me and my daughter by extension. That makes it personal. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Eli leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. You trusted me enough to ask for help. Now I'm asking you to trust me enough to let me actually help. Aurelia searched his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to convince her. It could get dangerous. If we're right about who's behind this, they have a lot to lose. I've handled dangerous situations before, not like this. Then teach me. For the first time in weeks, Aurelia smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. You know, when you saved my life in this cafe, I thought I was the one who owed you a debt. I'm starting to think I was wrong about that. No debts, Eli said firmly. Partners, she agreed, extending her hand across the table. They shook hands. Eli realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, this job had become something much more complicated and much more important than a simple business arrangement. He was committed now, not just to protecting Aurelia from photographers and driving her to meetings, but to helping her fight for something she believed in. He just hoped they were both strong enough for what was coming next. Outside the cafe, windows, the afternoon shadows were growing longer, and somewhere in the city, people were planning their next move in a game where the stakes were higher than Eli had initially understood. But for the moment, sitting across from a woman who'd trusted him with her crisis and her hope, he felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. After all, the best partnerships were forged in adversity, and if there was one thing Eli Navarro understood, it was how to fight for the people who mattered to him. The investigation began the next morning in Aurelia's borrowed office, with financial records spread across the conference table like pieces of a complex puzzle. Eli had taken a personal day from construction work, telling Mike Torres he had a family emergency that needed his attention. It wasn't entirely a lie. Aurelia had become important enough to him that her crisis felt personal. Start with the timeline, Aurelia said, pointing to a whiteboard where she'd drawn a chronological chart. The first contamination report surfaced 6 weeks ago. The initial whistleblower came forward 5 weeks ago. The media picked up the story 4 weeks ago. Eli studied the timeline, noting how quickly events had escalated. That's a very organized campaign. Exactly. This wasn't someone stumbling across evidence and feeling compelled to speak out. This was planned, coordinated, and timed for maximum impact. They spent the morning going through communication records, looking for patterns in who had access to what information when. Aurelia's assistant Marcus had been helpful, providing detailed logs of who had attended which meetings and who had received copies of which documents. Marcus has been invaluable through all of this, Aurelia said as she reviewed his meticulous records. I don't know what I would have done without him. Something in her tone made Eli look up from the financial reports he'd been studying. How long has he worked for you again? 3 years. He came highly recommended from Stanford's business school, brilliant mind for strategy and organization. And he has access to all of your confidential information. Of course, he's my assistant. He manages my calendar, handles sensitive communications, coordinates with legal and the board. Aurelia paused in her note-taking. Why? Eli wasn't sure how to voice the suspicion that was forming in his mind. It's probably nothing, but the person feeding information to reporters would need to have comprehensive access to your business, right? Someone who knows your schedule, your meetings, your legal strategy. Yes, but Marcus has been completely loyal throughout this crisis. He's worked 18-hour days trying to help me manage it. I'm sure you're right, Eli said, though something continued to nag at him. Can I ask you something else? Who suggested this office as a temporary workspace? Marcus found it for me. Why? Before Eli could answer, Marcus himself entered the conference room with a tablet in his hand and an expression of barely controlled panic. Aurelia, we have a major problem, he said, apparently not noticing Eli's presence. The FDA is launching a formal investigation. They want access to all our production records, supplier contracts, and quality control data. When? Tomorrow. They're sending investigators to the main production facility in Ohio. Marcus finally acknowledged Eli with a brief nod. I've already called our legal team, but this is going to require your direct involvement. Aurelia sank into her chair, the weight of this new development clearly overwhelming her. How did they move so quickly? FDA investigations usually take weeks to organize. Someone provided them with very specific allegations, detailed enough that they feel compelled to act immediately. What kind of details? Marcus consulted his tablet. Specific lot numbers, production dates, supplier names. Whoever filed this complaint knew exactly what to report and how to present it in a way that would trigger an immediate response. Eli watched Marcus carefully as he delivered this information. The young man seemed genuinely distressed, but there was something in his demeanor that felt rehearsed, as if he'd been preparing for this conversation. I need to see the complaint, Aurelia said. I'm trying to get a copy through our legal team, but the FDA isn't required to share it with us until the investigation begins. Then I need to get to Ohio tonight. If they're going to tear apart our production facility, I want to be there. Aurelia, I'm not sure that's wise, Marcus said quickly. Your presence might look like you're trying to interfere with the investigation. My absence would look like I have something to hide. Eli found himself studying the interaction between Aurelia and her assistant with growing unease. There was nothing overtly wrong with Marcus's behavior, but something felt off about his eagerness to keep Aurelia away from the investigation site. What if we split the difference? Eli suggested. Go to Ohio, but stay at a distance. Monitor the investigation without interfering. Marcus shot him a sharp look. I'm not sure Mr. Navarro understands the legal complexities involved here. Then explain them to me, Eli said calmly. The tension in the room was suddenly palpable. Marcus looked between Eli and Aurelia with an expression that suggested he was reassessing the dynamic between them. The legal complexities, Marcus said carefully, are that any appearance of obstruction could be used against us in both the FDA investigation and the civil lawsuits that are already being filed. Civil lawsuits? Aurelia's voice was sharp. 3 class action suits were filed this morning, all alleging health damages from contaminated supplements. Marcus's expression was appropriately grim. I was just about to brief you on them. Eli watched Aurelia process this information, saw the moment when the full scope of what she was facing truly hit her. Someone wasn't just trying to damage her reputation. They were trying to destroy her completely. I need some air, she said, quietly, standing up and walking toward the windows. Marcus immediately moved to follow her, but Eli intercepted him. Give her a minute. I don't think you understand the gravity of what's happening here, Marcus said, his voice low but intense. Aurelia needs professional guidance right now, not whatever this is. This is friendship, Eli replied. Something she seems to need more than professional guidance. Marcus studied him for a long moment. You're in over your head, Mr. Navarro. This isn't some construction project you can fix with hard work and good intentions. This is corporate warfare, and Aurelia needs allies who understand how to fight that kind of battle. There was something in Marcus's tone that sounded less like concern and more like a warning. Eli found himself wondering if the young man was trying to protect Aurelia or trying to isolate her. Across the room, Aurelia stood silhouetted against the city skyline, her shoulders rigid with tension. Eli walked over to join her, leaving Marcus at the conference table with his tablet and his carefully organized crisis management. How are you holding up? Eli asked quietly. I keep thinking there should be a bottom to this, she said without turning around. A point where it can't get any worse. But every time I think we've reached it, something new happens. That's not an accident. No, it's not. She turned to face him, and he could see the exhaustion and worry in her eyes. Eli, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, always. Do you think I'm losing my mind? This whole conspiracy theory about someone systematically destroying my company, does it sound like the paranoid delusions of someone who can't accept that she made mistakes? Eli considered the question seriously. Before answering, 3 weeks ago I would have said maybe, but I've been watching how this unfolds, and there's nothing random about it. Someone is orchestrating this with precision and inside knowledge. Then help me figure out who. I'm trying to, but I need you to consider the possibility that it might be someone you trust. Aurelia's expression sharpened. You think it's Marcus? I think someone with comprehensive access to your business is feeding information to your enemies. And I think that same person is working very hard to keep you from effectively fighting back. Before Aurelia could respond, Marcus appeared beside them. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just received a call from the legal team. They want to schedule an emergency meeting tonight to discuss our response strategy. Set it up, Aurelia said. There's one more thing. The reporters outside your apartment building have been joined by protesters, people claiming they were poisoned by our supplements. Security thinks it might not be safe for you to go home tonight. Eli felt his protective instincts flare. What kind of protesters? About 20 people with signs. Mostly peaceful, but some of them are getting confrontational with anyone who tries to enter the building. I have a guest room, Eli found himself saying. If you need somewhere to stay tonight. Both Aurelia and Marcus stared at him. Marcus spoke first. That's absolutely not appropriate. Aurelia can't stay with an employee. The optics are already damaged, Eli said. And I'm not offering as an employee. I'm offering as a friend. Aurelia looked between the two men, clearly weighing her options. Marcus, cancel the legal meeting for tonight. Schedule it for tomorrow morning instead. I need time to think clearly about our next moves. Aurelia, I really don't think Marcus. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars. I appreciate your concern, but I need some space to process everything that's happening. Marcus's expression suggested he had more to say, but he simply nodded. I'll rearrange the schedule, but please be careful. The media attention around you is becoming dangerous. After Marcus left, Aurelia turned to Eli. Are you sure about this? Having me stay at your place will only fuel more speculation about our relationship. Let them speculate. Right now, your safety is more important than public perception. Sophie might not appreciate having a house guest. Eli smiled for the first time all day. Are you kidding? She's been dying to interrogate you properly ever since your brief introduction. This will make her weak. That evening, as Eli turned into his apartment complex with Aurelia in the passenger seat, he realized how dramatically his life had changed. In just a few weeks, 3 weeks ago, his biggest concern had been whether he could afford new tires for his truck. Now, he was harboring a billionaire fugitive in his modest 2-bedroom apartment while helping her investigate corporate sabotage. Second thoughts? Aurelia asked, apparently reading his expression. No second thoughts, he said firmly, but I should probably warn you. Sophie's going to want to know everything about your business, your personal life, and your intentions. Toward her father. I can handle teenage interrogation. We'll see about that. As they climbed the stairs to his apartment, Eli found himself hoping that bringing Aurelia into his home wouldn't be the mistake that Marcus clearly thought it was. But looking at her determined expression, he realized that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and for the first time since this crisis began, that felt like enough. Sophie's reaction to finding Aurelia Langford sitting at their kitchen table was exactly what Eli had expected. Pure, undisguised fascination mixed with protective scrutiny. So you're the billionaire, Sophie said, settling into the chair across from Aurelia with the directness that only teenagers could manage. I'm the billionaire in trouble, Aurelia replied with a smile. Your father is helping me figure out how to get out of it. Good. Dad's really smart, even though he doesn't always think so. Eli, who was attempting to prepare dinner that wouldn't embarrass him in front of someone accustomed to 5-star restaurants, paused in his chopping to listen to the conversation developing behind him. What kind of trouble are you in? Sophie asked. Someone is spreading lies about my company, trying to make it look like we've been selling products that could hurt people. But you haven't? No, we haven't. Sophie nodded, as if this settled the matter completely. Then you just have to prove they're lying. That's what we're trying to do. And Dad's helping you because he's good at figuring things out, or because he likes you? Eli nearly cut his finger with the kitchen knife. Sophie, it's okay, Aurelia said, laughing. I think he's helping because he's a good person who sees someone in trouble and wants to help, though I hope he likes me a little bit too. He does, Sophie said, with the confidence of someone who'd been observing her father carefully for 14 years. He's been happier these past few weeks than he's been in a long time. Eli turned around to find both women looking at him with expressions that made him feel like he was under a microscope. Can we focus on dinner? What are you making? Aurelia asked. Spaghetti with meat sauce, nothing fancy. It smells wonderful. Sophie leaned forward in her chair, clearly settling in for a more detailed interrogation. So how rich are you exactly? Sophie, Eli warned. What? I'm curious. I've never met a billionaire before. Aurelia seemed genuinely amused by the directness. Rich enough that I don't have to worry about money for basic things. Not rich enough to solve all the world's problems, though. I try to help where I can. Do you live in a mansion? I live in a penthouse apartment downtown. It's probably bigger than it needs to be for one person. Are you lonely? The question was asked with such innocent directness that it caught Aurelia off guard. Eli saw her expression shift, becoming more vulnerable. Sometimes, she admitted, it can be difficult to know whether people like you for yourself or for what you can provide for them. Sophie nodded solemnly. That's why Dad's good for you. He doesn't need anything from anybody. Sophie, Eli said again, but with less conviction. His daughter had a point. It's true, Sophie continued. Dad could have asked you for money or favors or anything, but he didn't. He just helped because you needed help. I've noticed that about him, Aurelia said softly. Dinner conversation continued in this vein, with Sophie asking increasingly personal questions and Aurelia answering them with remarkable patience and honesty. Eli found himself learning things about Aurelia that hadn't come up during their professional interactions. That she'd grown up in a small town in Oregon, that she'd put herself through college working 3 jobs, that she'd started her company in her garage with $5,000 borrowed from her credit cards. So you weren't always rich? Sophie asked. No, definitely not. I grew up a lot like you're growing up now. Single parent, not much money, lots of worry about making ends meet. What happened to your dad? Sophie, Eli interjected, sensing they were approaching sensitive territory. It's all right, Aurelia said. My father died of complications from diabetes when I was in college. He couldn't afford proper medical care, and by the time he qualified for assistance programs, it was too late. Is that why you started the wellness company? That's exactly why. I wanted to make health products that people like my father could afford. Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this information, and now someone's trying to destroy it. Yes, that's really mean. Yes, it is. After dinner, Sophie retreated to her room to work on homework, leaving Eli and Aurelia alone. In the small living room, the apartment suddenly felt cramped, with Aurelia's presence filling the space, not because she was demanding attention, but because Eli was acutely aware of her in ways that made him uncomfortable. Sophie's remarkable, Aurelia said, settling. Onto the couch. You should be proud. I am. She's better than I deserve. I don't think that's true. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soft sounds of Sophie's music drifting down the hallway. Eli found himself studying Aurelia's profile in the lamplight, noting how different she looked here in his modest living room, less polished, more human. Can I ask you something? He said. Of course. This afternoon, when Marcus was giving us updates about the FDA investigation and the lawsuits, did anything about his behavior strike you as odd? Aurelia considered the question carefully. He was more agitated than usual, but given the circumstances, that seems understandable. It wasn't the agitation. It was how prepared he seemed, like he'd been expecting these developments. Marcus. It's very good at anticipating problems. It's part of what makes him valuable. Or maybe he knew about the problems because he helped create them. Aurelia turned to face him fully. Eli, I understand why you're suspicious, but Marcus has been completely loyal throughout this crisis. He's worked around the clock trying to help me manage it. What if managing it includes controlling it? What if he's been feeding you information, designed to keep you reactive instead of proactive? Before Aurelia could respond, Eli's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sophie's school number, which was strange, given that it was 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. Mr. Navarro, the voice belonged to Principal Martinez, but she sounded strained. I'm sorry to call so late, but I wanted to give you a heads up about something that's going to be in tomorrow's newspaper. Eli's stomach dropped. What kind of something? A reporter contacted our office today, asking about Sophie's academic record, her attendance, and your involvement in school activities. They also asked about any recent behavioral issues. What did you tell them? Nothing, of course. Student records are confidential. But Mr. Navarro, they knew about the incident last week with the other students. They knew details that should have been private. Eli felt the blood drain from his face. What kind of details? They knew about the custody concerns mentioned in Sophie's file. They knew about your ex-wife's relocation to Sacramento. They seemed to have access to information that only someone with official access should have. Thank you for the warning, Eli managed. I'm sorry this is happening to your family. Sophie is a wonderful student, and you're a devoted father. I hope you know that. After he hung up, Eli stared at his phone for a long moment before looking up at Aurelia, who had clearly heard enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. They're going after Sophie, he said quietly. Who's going after Sophie? Whoever's been orchestrating this campaign against you. They're trying to make me look like an unfit father. Aurelia's face went pale. Eli, I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. I brought you into this, and now they're targeting your daughter. Eli's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at the screen and felt his world tilt sideways. The message was from his ex-wife's lawyer. We need to discuss changes to the custody arrangement. Please call tomorrow to schedule a meeting. What is it? Aurelia asked, reading his expression. Eli handed her the phone. After she read the message, she looked up at him with an expression of horror and understanding. They're going to try to take Sophie away from you. Yeah, they are. The room fell silent except for the sound of Sophie's music from down the hallway. Eli thought about his daughter in her bedroom, working on homework, and probably wondering what the adults were discussing. So seriously in the living room, she had no idea that her entire world was about to be turned upside down. Eli, Aurelia said softly, if staying away from me would protect Sophie, you should do it. This job, this friendship, none of it is worth risking your relationship with. Your daughter? No, he said firmly. I'm not running away. Someone is attacking both of us, and running away won't stop them. But Sophie deserves a father who fights for what's right, not one who backs down when things get difficult. Aurelia studied his face in the lamplight. You're sure? I'm sure. But we need to figure out who's doing this, and we need to figure it out fast. Then we start with Marcus. What do you mean? Tomorrow I'm going to give him false information about my plans, something specific and detailed. If it shows up in the media or gets used against us, we'll know he's the leak. And if he's not, then we keep looking until we find who is. Eli nodded. But as he looked toward the hallway where his daughter was safely tucked away in her room, he realized that tomorrow would determine not just Aurelia's future, but his own family's survival. Someone had declared war on both of them, and now it was time to fight back. The question was whether they were strong enough to win, and whether they could do it before Sophie paid the price for his decision to help a stranger in need. Outside, the city lights twinkled like stars, and somewhere in those lights, people were planning their next move in a game where the stakes had just become higher than either Eli or Aurelia had ever imagined. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Eli was making coffee while Aurelia helped Sophie with her calculus homework at the kitchen table, a sight that would have seemed impossible just a month ago when his phone rang with an unknown number. "Mr. Navarro, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Seattle Police Department. I need to speak with you about some allegations that have been made regarding your fitness as a guardian." Eli stepped into the hallway, his heart hammering. "What kind of allegations? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to come to the station this morning? Am I under arrest?" "No, sir, but there are some serious concerns that need to be addressed." After he hung up, Eli stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to process what was happening. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Sophie bent over her homework while Aurelia patiently explained a complex equation. The normalcy of the scene made what was happening feel even more surreal. "Dad?" Sophie's voice carried concern. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine, kiddo. I just need to run some errands this morning." But when he returned to the kitchen, Aurelia took one look at his face and knew it wasn't fine at all. "What happened?" she asked quietly. "Police want to talk to me about my fitness as a parent." Sophie looked up from her homework, her eyes wide. "What does that mean?" "It means someone's been telling lies about how Dad takes care of you," Aurelia said gently. "But lies can be corrected." "Who would do that?" Eli and Aurelia exchanged a look over Sophie's head. "We're going to find out," Eli said. An hour later, Eli sat across from Detective Chen in a sterile interview room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and too much coffee. The detective was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd heard every possible family crisis story. "Mr. Navarro, I want to be clear that we don't consider you a suspect in anything, but we've received information suggesting that your current living situation might not be in your daughter's best interest." "What kind of information?" Detective Chen consulted a file folder. "Anonymous tips suggesting that you've been exposing your minor daughter to potentially dangerous situations related to your employment with Aurelia Langford. Specifically, that she's been present during meetings with individuals involved in criminal activities." "That's completely false. I understand your position. But we also have reports that Ms. Langford has been staying in your home with your daughter present, which raises questions about appropriate boundaries." Eli felt his temper flare. "Aurelia stayed one night because protesters were threatening her at her apartment building. She slept on the couch and helped Sophie with homework. If that's inappropriate, then I don't understand what appropriate means anymore. Mr. Navarro, I'm not here to judge your personal relationships, but when anonymous reports suggest that a minor child might be in an unstable or potentially dangerous environment, we're obligated to investigate." "Anonymous reports from who?" "I can't share that information." Eli leaned back in his chair, beginning to understand the scope of what was happening. "Detective, can I ask you something? How many anonymous reports have you received about my parenting in the past week?" "Several." "And before that? In the 14 years I've been raising Sophie as a single parent?" Detective Chen's expression softened slightly. "None. Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? That suddenly, right when I start working for someone who's embroiled in a very public scandal, multiple people become concerned about my parenting. It's not my job to analyze the timing of reports, Mr. Navarro. It's my job to ensure that children are safe." "Then talk to Sophie. Talk to her teachers, her principal, her doctors. Ask them if I'm a good father. We intend to do that." The interview continued for another hour, with Detective Chen asking detailed questions about Sophie's daily routine, her academic performance, her emotional well-being, and Eli's ability to provide for her needs. By the time it was over, Eli felt like every aspect of his parenting had been scrutinized and found wanting. When he finally left the police station, Eli drove aimlessly through the city for 20 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Someone was systematically attempting to destroy his life, and they were using his love for Sophie as the weapon. His phone rang as he was sitting at a red light. Aurelia's name appeared on the screen. Eli, where are you? Marcus just told me something you need to hear. I'm on my way back. When he arrived at his apartment, he found Aurelia pacing in the living room while Marcus sat stiffly on the couch with a laptop open in front of him. Sophie was nowhere to be seen. Where's Sophie? Eli asked immediately. School, Aurelia said. Marcus came by with some information about who might be behind the attacks on both of us. Marcus looked up from his laptop with an expression that seemed to combine vindication with concern. Eli, I owe you an apology. You were right to be suspicious yesterday, but you were suspicious of the wrong person. What do you mean? Show him, Aurelia said. Marcus turned the laptop around to display a series of financial records. These are payment authorizations from Langford Wellness's main competitor, Pinnacle Health Systems. Payments made to a private investigation firm, a public relations company specializing in crisis management, and a legal firm that handles corporate sabotage cases. Eli studied the screen. They hired people to attack Aurelia's company? Not just attack, Marcus said. Destroy. Look at the timeline. The payments began 3 months ago, well before the first contamination report surfaced. Someone had been planning this campaign for a long time. But how did they get inside information about the company? Eli asked. Marcus's expression darkened. They didn't need inside information. They created it. What do you mean? Aurelia sat down heavily in the chair across from them. Marcus found evidence that Pinnacle Health has been systematically infiltrating our company for over a year. Fake employees, contractors who were actually gathering intelligence, even board members who were being paid to vote against my interests. Board members? 3 of them, Marcus confirmed, including Richard Stone, who's been one of our most vocal critics throughout this crisis. Eli felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Richard Stone. Any relation to you? Marcus's face flushed. My uncle, but I swear I had no idea what he was doing. I've been investigating the leaks for weeks, trying to figure out how information was getting to reporters so quickly. And what? Did you find that someone has been accessing my computer remotely, using my credentials to gather information and make it look like I was the source of the leaks? Marcus's voice was tight with anger. They've been using me to spy on Aurelia. For months, Aurelia looked at Eli with an expression that mixed relief with exhaustion. We've been fighting shadows, Eli. The real enemy has been 3 steps ahead of us the entire time. But now we know who they are, Eli said. Knowing and proving are different things, Marcus interjected. And they're not done with us. In fact, I think they're accelerating their timeline. What do you mean? Marcus pulled up another screen on his laptop. I've been monitoring communications that my uncle thought I couldn't access. They're planning something big for tomorrow, something designed to end this crisis decisively in their favor. What kind of something? I don't know all the details, but it involves a coordinated media event, new evidence about the contamination and, Marcus hesitated, and something about neutralizing the personal complications. Eli felt his blood run cold. Personal complications meaning me and Sophie. I think so. Aurelia stood up abruptly, beginning to pace again. We have to stop them. Whatever they're planning, we have to get ahead of it. How? By going public. With everything we know. The infiltration, the payments, the coordination between Pinnacle Health and the board members. We expose the entire conspiracy before they can complete their final move. Eli thought about his meeting with Detective Chen, about the anonymous reports designed to make him look like an unfit father. What if going public makes things worse? What if it looks like we're making desperate accusations because we're losing? Then we make sure we have evidence that can't be dismissed as desperation. Marcus closed his laptop with a decisive snap. I can get us evidence. My uncle thinks I'm still in the dark about his activities. If I can get him to admit what Pinnacle Health has been doing, record it somehow. That's dangerous, Aurelia warned. If he realizes you know what he's been doing, then we better make sure he doesn't realize it until it's too late. Eli looked between Aurelia and Marcus, seeing the determination in their faces. What do you need me to do? Tomorrow is the custody hearing for Sophie. Aurelia said quietly. Whatever Pinnacle Health is planning, it's probably time to coincide. With that, they want to destroy both of us simultaneously, so we beat them to it. How? Eli thought about his daughter, probably sitting in a classroom right now, with no idea that her entire future was being decided by adults playing games she didn't understand. He thought about Aurelia, who'd built something meaningful, and was watching it get torn apart by people who cared more about profit than principles. "We tell the truth," he said finally. "All of it, publicly, completely, and with enough evidence that no one can dismiss it as conspiracy theories." "That's a big risk," Marcus warned. "If we're wrong about any part of this, or if we can't prove everything we're alleging, then we lose everything anyway," Eli finished. "But at least we'll lose fighting instead of running." Aurelia moved to the window, looking out at the city where somewhere their enemies were planning their final assault. "Tomorrow is going to determine whether I keep my company and you keep your daughter. Then we better make sure tomorrow goes our way." As they began planning their counterattack, Eli realized that the next 24 hours would test everything they'd learned about trust, courage, and the willingness to fight for what mattered most. The stakes couldn't be higher, and failure wasn't an option. Outside, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and change was coming whether they were ready for it or not. The custody hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning in a downtown courthouse that had seen decades of families torn apart and rebuilt. Eli arrived 30 minutes early, wearing his one good suit and carrying a folder of documents that he hoped would be enough to prove he was a fit father. His ex-wife, Jennifer, was already there with her new husband David and their lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she'd never lost a case she cared about winning. Jennifer avoided eye contact, but David stared at Eli with the kind of casual hostility that comes from believing you're about to win something important. "Mr. Navarro," Jennifer's lawyer approached him before the hearing began. "I'm Rebecca Torres. I represent your ex-wife in this matter. I know who you are. I wanted to give you one last opportunity to reach a settlement before we proceed. Mrs. Davidson is willing to allow you supervised visitation every other weekend if you agree to transfer primary custody to her voluntarily." Eli looked past the lawyer to where Jennifer sat next to her new husband, finally meeting his ex-wife's eyes. "Is that what you want, Jen? To take Sophie away from the only home she's ever known?" Jennifer's composure cracked slightly. "I want what's best for Sophie. And what's best for her is stability, Eli. A two-parent home, financial security, a safe environment. She has that with me." "Do you?" David interjected, speaking for the first time. "Because from what I've read in the papers, you've been exposing her to some pretty questionable situations lately." Eli felt his temper flare, but before he could respond, he heard familiar voices in the courthouse corridor. Through the glass doors, he could see Aurelia approaching with Marcus, and another man he didn't recognize. Someone in an expensive suit who carried himself with the authority of someone accustomed to courtrooms. "Excuse me," Eli said to the lawyer, and walked over to meet them. "What are you doing here?" he asked Aurelia quietly. "We're here to help," she said. "This is James Morrison, my personal attorney. He specializes in family law. I can't afford—" "You're not paying for it." "I am." "Aurelia, I can't let you—" "Yes, you can, and you will." Her voice carried the same authority he'd heard when she was dealing with her board of directors. "Someone attacked your family because of your association with me. I'm not letting you fight that battle alone." James Morrison stepped forward with the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never met a legal challenge he couldn't handle. "Mr. Navarro, I've reviewed the allegations against you, and I'm confident we can address them effectively." What did Marcus find out about his uncle? Marcus looked nervous but determined. "I'm meeting with him this afternoon. I've arranged for what he thinks is a private conversation about coordinating our response to the custody hearing. He doesn't know I'll be recording everything." "Be careful," Eli warned. "I will be. The courtroom was smaller than Eli had expected, with wooden benches that had been polished by decades of anxious parents and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Judge Patricia Williams was a woman in her 60s, with grey hair and the patient expression of someone who'd heard every possible family crisis story. Jennifer's lawyer presented their case first, painting a picture of Eli as a well-meaning but irresponsible father who'd allowed his association with a scandalous businessman to compromise his daughter's safety and well-being. She introduced evidence of his erratic work schedule, his involvement with individuals under federal investigation, and the unstable living situation created by having Aurelia stay at his apartment. "Your Honor," Rebecca Torres said in conclusion, "Mr. Navarro clearly loves his daughter, but love isn't enough to provide the kind of stable, secure environment that Sophie needs during these formative teenage years." When it was James Morrison's turn, he stood with the kind of calm confidence that immediately commanded attention. "Your Honor, this case isn't really about custody arrangements. It's about a deliberate campaign to destroy Mr. Navarro's reputation in order to damage his relationship with his daughter." He introduced evidence that Eli hadn't known existed, documentation of the anonymous reports to child services, financial records showing payments from Pinnacle Health to private investigators, and communication records proving coordination between the attacks on Aurelia's business and the attacks on Eli's fitness as a parent. This is a coordinated assault designed to isolate Ms. Langford from anyone who might effectively help her defend herself against false accusations. Mr. Navarro became a target not because he's an unfit father, but because he's an effective ally. Jennifer's lawyer objected repeatedly, claiming that the business disputes had nothing to do with the custody case. But Judge Williams allowed the evidence, clearly intrigued by the scope of what was being alleged. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said during a brief recess, "these are serious accusations you're making about corporate interference in family court proceedings." "Yes, Your Honor, and we have more evidence coming this afternoon that will prove everything we're alleging." When the hearing resumed, James Morrison called character witnesses, Sophie's teachers, her principal, even Mrs. Chen from next door, who testified about Eli's devotion to his daughter and the respectful, loving relationship she'd observed between them. "Mr. Navarro works hard to provide for Sophie," Principal Martinez testified, "but he's never missed a parent-teacher conference, never failed to respond when she needed him, and Sophie herself is one of our most well-adjusted students." Then James Morrison called a witness that surprised everyone in the courtroom: Sophie herself. "Your Honor," he said, "Sophie Navarro is 14 years old, which is old enough for this court to consider her preferences regarding custody arrangements. I'd like her to have the opportunity to speak for herself." Sophie entered the courtroom, wearing her best dress and the determined expression that Eli recognized from their morning conversations about difficult topics. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, though Eli could see the nervousness in the way she gripped her hands together. "Sophie," James Morrison said gently, "can you tell the court about your relationship with your father?" "My dad is the best person I know," Sophie said, her voice clear, despite her obvious nervousness. "He works really hard to take care of me, and he always puts me first. Even when he's tired or worried about money, he still helps me with homework and makes time to talk about things that are important to me. How do you feel about the possibility of moving to Sacramento to live with your mother?" Sophie glanced at Jennifer, and Eli could see the conflict in her expression. "I love my mom, and I want to have a relationship with her, but my home is with my dad. My school is here, my friends are here, and everything I care about is here. What about your father's work with Miss Langford? Has that affected your daily life?" "Miss Langford is really nice," Sophie said with a small smile. "She helped me with my calculus homework, and she understands what it's like to grow up without much money. She makes my dad happy, and she's never been anything but kind to me." Jennifer's lawyer tried to shake Sophie's testimony during cross-examination, But the teenager answered every question with a poise that made Eli's chest swell with pride. "Sophie," Rebecca Torres said, "don't you think you deserve to live in a home where you don't have to worry about money, where both parents can provide for your needs?" "I don't worry about money," Sophie replied. "My dad makes sure I have everything I need. And I'd rather live with one parent who loves me completely than two parents who can buy me things but don't really know who I am." The courtroom fell silent after that response. Even Jennifer's lawyer seemed to realize that she'd just handed Sophie an opportunity to articulate exactly why the custody arrangement should remain unchanged. Judge Williams called for a lunch recess, and as they filed out of the courtroom, Eli pulled Sophie aside. "Kiddo, you were incredible in there." "I just told the truth, Dad." "I know, but telling the truth takes courage, especially when it's difficult. You taught me that." As they stood in the courthouse corridor, watching the lawyers and family members disperse for lunch, Eli's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Meeting with my uncle in 1 hour. Wish me luck." The afternoon session would determine not just Sophie's future, but whether the evidence they'd gathered would be enough to expose the conspiracy that had brought them all to this moment. Either way, Eli knew that the next few hours would change everything. The afternoon session began with an unexpected development. James Morrison stood before Judge Williams with a tablet in his hand and an expression that suggested he was about to drop a legal bombshell. "Your Honor, we've just received evidence that fundamentally changes the nature of this custody dispute. With the court's permission, I'd like to present recordings obtained this afternoon that prove the allegations against Mr. Navarro are part of a coordinated corporate conspiracy." Jennifer's lawyer was on her feet immediately. "Objection! This is highly irregular. We haven't had time to review any new evidence." "Your Honor," James Morrison replied calmly, "this evidence was obtained legally this afternoon through cooperation with law enforcement. Detective Sarah Chen of the Seattle Police Department is here to authenticate the recordings and explain their relevance to the false reports filed against Mr. Navarro." Judge Williams looked intrigued, despite the irregular nature of the proceedings. "I'll allow it, but this better be relevant to the custody matter before this court." Detective Chen took the stand and explained how Marcus Stone had contacted police that morning, with evidence of criminal conspiracy involving false reports to child services. She confirmed that Marcus had worn a wire during his meeting with his uncle Richard Stone, and that the recording had captured Richard Stone admitting to orchestrating both the attacks on Aurelia's company and the custody challenge against Eli. The defendant, Richard Stone, admitted on tape that the reports questioning Mr. Navarro's fitness as a parent were fabricated as part of a larger campaign to isolate and discredit Ms. Aurelia Langford, Detective Chen testified. He specifically stated that removing Mr. Navarro's support system would make Ms. Langford more vulnerable to the business attacks. James Morrison played the relevant portions of the recording for the court. Richard Stone's voice filled the courtroom with chilling clarity. "The custody thing was brilliant, wasn't it? Hit Navarro where it hurts most, and suddenly he's too worried about keeping his kid to help Langford fight back. Two birds, one stone. Pardon the pun." Marcus's voice responded with carefully controlled outrage. "You're talking about destroying a family to win a business dispute. I'm talking about eliminating obstacles to a $40 billion acquisition. Langford Wellness is worth more broken up and sold for parts than it is as a functioning company. But as long as she has people helping her fight back effectively, she might actually survive this." The courtroom was dead silent as the recording played. Even Jennifer looked shocked by what she was hearing. "Your Honor," James Morrison continued after the recording ended, "this proves beyond any doubt that the custody challenge against Mr. Navarro is not based on legitimate concerns about Sophie's welfare. It's corporate warfare being fought in family court." Jennifer's lawyer tried to salvage the situation. "Your Honor, even if there was improper motivation behind bringing these concerns to light, that doesn't change the underlying facts about Mr. Navarro's lifestyle and choices." "What underlying facts?" Judge Williams asked sharply. Every witness who testified about Mr. Navarro's parenting praised his devotion to his daughter. Every teacher and school official confirmed that Sophie is thriving in his care. The only negative reports came from anonymous sources who we now know were part of a criminal conspiracy. The judge turned to Jennifer directly. Mrs. Davidson, did you know about this conspiracy when you filed for custody modification? Jennifer looked stricken. No, Your Honor, I was contacted by someone who said they were concerned about Sophie's welfare. They provided me with information about Eli's involvement with Ms. Langford and suggested that I might want to reconsider our custody arrangement. Who contacted you? I don't know. They said they were a concerned friend, someone who'd seen the newspaper articles and thought I should know what was happening. Detective Chen leaned forward. Your Honor, we believe that contact was also part of the conspiracy. Mrs. Davidson appears to have been manipulated into filing this custody challenge. Judge Williams was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of what she'd heard. Mr. Morrison, is there more evidence? Yes, Your Honor. We also have financial records showing that private investigators hired by Pinnacle Health Corporation conducted surveillance on Mr. Navarro and his daughter, and that those same investigators were responsible for the anonymous reports to child services. And where is Mr. Richard Stone now? In custody, Your Honor. He was arrested immediately after the recorded conversation for conspiracy, filing false reports, and corporate espionage. The judge looked at Jennifer and her lawyer. Mrs. Davidson, in light of this evidence, do you wish to continue pursuing this custody modification? Jennifer was crying now, whether from embarrassment or relief. Eli couldn't tell. No, Your Honor. I never wanted to hurt Sophie or Eli. I thought I was protecting my daughter. The court finds that this custody challenge was initiated under false pretenses and based on fabricated evidence, Judge Williams declared. The existing custody arrangement will remain in place. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full investigation into how family court proceedings were manipulated by outside parties. As the gavel came down, Eli felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Sophie, who had been allowed to remain in the courtroom for the afternoon session, ran to him with tears of relief in her eyes. Dad, does this mean I get to stay with you? Yes, kiddo. You get to stay with me. Outside the courthouse, the media circus that had been following Aurelia's story had grown considerably. Reporters and cameras crowded the steps, and Eli could see that word of the conspiracy revelations had already leaked. Aurelia was waiting by the car with Marcus, both of them looking exhausted but victorious. When she saw Eli and Sophie emerge from the courthouse, her face lit up with genuine joy. How did it go? She asked, though the answer was obvious from their expressions. We won, Sophie said simply, and the bad guys got arrested. That's the best summary of today's events I've heard, James Morrison said, joining them with a satisfied smile. Mr. Navarro, you and your daughter are officially free from this particular form of harassment. What happens now? Eli asked. Now we rebuild, Aurelia said firmly. My company, your reputation, and hopefully some kind of normal life for all of us. As they prepared to leave, a reporter pushed through the crowd with a cameraman close behind. Ms. Langford, can you comment on the conspiracy allegations? Is it true that Pinnacle Health orchestrated this entire scandal? Aurelia looked at Eli, who nodded encouragingly. She stepped forward to address the media with the confidence of someone who had the truth on her side. The evidence speaks for itself, she said clearly. My company has been the target of a systematic campaign of sabotage and misinformation, designed to destroy our reputation and eliminate us as competition. But the truth has a way of emerging, and today, justice was served. What about your relationship with Eli Navarro? Another reporter shouted. Is it true that you're romantically involved? Aurelia looked back at Eli with a smile that was equal parts affection and mischief. Mr. Navarro is someone I care about deeply. He helped me when I needed it most. and he's proven to be exactly the kind of person I hoped he was when I first asked for his help. Dad, Sophie whispered loudly enough for the microphones to pick up, does this mean you're dating a billionaire? The question broke the tension, and even some of the reporters laughed. Eli put his arm around his daughter and looked at Aurelia with an expression that answered Sophie's question without words. I'm dating a woman who happens to be successful, he said to the cameras. And she's dating a construction worker who happens to be a good father. Everything else is just noise. As they made their way to the car through the crowd of reporters, Eli realized that the past month had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. He'd started this journey trying to help a stranger in need, and he'd ended up finding something he hadn't even known he was looking for. The future was still uncertain. There would be legal proceedings, media attention, and the complex work of rebuilding both Aurelia's company and their own relationship. But for the first time in years, Eli felt like he was moving towards something hopeful instead of just trying to survive from day to day. Sophie squeezed his hand as they reached the car. Dad, are you happy? Yeah, kiddo, I think I really am. And as they drove away from the courthouse toward whatever came next, Eli realized that sometimes the best things in life really did begin with a simple decision to help someone in need. 6 months later, Eli stood in the same courthouse where his custody battle had been fought, but this time he was wearing a different kind of suit and carrying a very different kind of paperwork. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of the Marriage License Bureau, casting everything in a golden glow that seemed fitting for new beginnings. Are you nervous? Aurelia asked, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from his jacket. Terrified, he admitted with a grin, but the good kind of terrified. Sophie, who had appointed herself as both maid of honor and wedding coordinator, checked her watch with the seriousness of someone managing a corporate merger. We have exactly 15 minutes before the ceremony starts. Where's Marcus? Right. Here, Marcus called from the doorway, slightly out of breath but carrying the rings they'd almost forgotten at the apartment. Sorry, traffic was terrible. The past 6 months had brought changes that none of them could have predicted. Richard Stone and 3 Pinnacle Health executives had been convicted of corporate conspiracy and were serving prison sentences. Aurelia's company had not only survived the scandal, but had emerged stronger, with a surge of public support after the truth came out. Eli had started his own construction company with Aurelia's backing, focusing on affordable housing projects that matched both their values. Most importantly, they'd learned to build a life together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared commitment to something larger than themselves. The ceremony was small and simple, held in the courthouse's garden with just a handful of people who mattered most to them. Sophie stood beside them as they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising to support each other's dreams and face whatever challenges came their way as partners. Eli, Aurelia said when it was her turn to speak, 6 months ago you saved my life in a cafe, and you've been saving it every day since. You taught me that real strength isn't about protecting yourself from vulnerability. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with the right person. Aurelia, Eli replied, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. You taught me that taking care of someone doesn't mean limiting their possibilities. It means helping them become everything they're capable of being. You've made me a better father, a better man, and somehow convinced me that I deserve to be happy. You do, Sophie interjected loudly enough for everyone to hear, earning laughter from the small gathering. Judge Williams, who had agreed to officiate, after presiding over their custody case, smiled as she pronounced them married. By the power vested in me by the state of Washington, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was gentle, full of promise, and interrupted by Sophie's enthusiastic applause. As they broke apart, Eli looked at his new wife, a phrase that still seemed surreal, and saw his own sense of wonder reflected in her eyes. So what now? Aurelia asked as they walked back toward the courthouse, her hand warm in his. Now we go home, Sophie said decisively. I made a cake, and Mrs. Chen is coming over for dinner. She wants to make sure Aurelia knows all the embarrassing stories about Dad from when they were neighbors. All of them? Eli asked with mock horror. Especially the one about the time you tried to fix the bathroom sink and flooded the entire apartment, Sophie said with a grin that was pure mischief. Home turned out to be the house they'd bought together in Sophie's school district. Not a mansion despite Aurelia's resources, but a comfortable place with a garden where Eli could work with his hands and Sophie could spread her art projects across a kitchen table that was big enough for all of them. That evening, as they sat around that table with Mrs. Chen and Marcus, and a few other friends, sharing cake and stories and laughter, Eli marveled at how different his life had become. A year ago, he'd been a single father, struggling to make ends meet, worried about Sophie's future and his own. Now he was surrounded by people who cared about him, building something meaningful with a woman who challenged and supported him in equal measure. Dad, Sophie said, as they were cleaning up after their guests had left, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't helped Aurelia that day at the cafe? Eli considered the question while loading dishes into their new dishwasher, a luxury that still felt strange but wonderful. Sometimes. Why? Because I think about it a lot. About how one small decision to help someone changed everything for all of us. Aurelia, who was wiping down the counters, paused to listen to the conversation. What do you think would have happened? Eli asked. I think we would have been fine, Sophie said thoughtfully. You would have kept taking care of me, and I would have grown up knowing I was loved, but we wouldn't have had this. She gestured around the kitchen, encompassing not just the house but everything it represented. We wouldn't have had Aurelia or Marcus or the chance to help other people the way we've been helped. That's very wise, kiddo. I get it from you, Sophie said with a smile. Both of you, actually. Aurelia taught me that having more than you need means you get to help other people have what they need too. Later that night, after Sophie had gone to bed and they'd finished the last of the wedding cleanup, Eli and Aurelia sat on their back porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The city lights were distant enough that they could actually see the constellations, something that had been impossible from Eli's old apartment. Any regrets? Aurelia asked, her head resting on his shoulder. About what? Getting tangled up with a billionaire in crisis, taking on corporate conspiracies, having your life turned upside down by someone you barely knew. Eli thought about everything they'd been through, the media attention, the legal battles, the uncertainty and fear. But he also thought about the laughter that now filled their house, the way Aurelia and Sophie had bonded over homework and shared jokes, the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. No regrets, he said firmly. Well, maybe one. What's that? I regret that it took a crisis to bring us together. I wish we could have found each other under easier circumstances. Aurelia lifted her head to look at him in the starlight. I don't. I think we needed to go through everything we went through to become the people who were ready for this. A year ago, I was so focused on protecting myself that I wouldn't have recognized what you were offering, and you were so focused on just surviving that you might not have been ready to take a chance on something bigger. And now we're ready for whatever comes next. What do you think comes next? Aurelia smiled, the expression visible even in the dim light. I think we keep building. The business, this family, whatever Sophie needs to become the incredible adult she's going to be. I think we keep helping people who need it. And I think we keep choosing to trust each other even when it's scary. That sounds like a good plan. It is a good plan. As they sat together in the comfortable silence of two people who'd found their way home, Eli reflected on the truth Sophie had identified earlier. One small decision to help someone in need had changed everything. Not just for him and Aurelia, but for Sophie, for Marcus, for the employees of Langford Wellness who still had jobs because the truth had emerged in time. It was a reminder that ordinary people making ordinary choices to help each other could create extraordinary outcomes. That kindness was never wasted, even when, especially when, you couldn't see where it might lead. Inside the house, he could hear Sophie's music playing softly through her bedroom door, the sound of a teenager secure in the knowledge that she was loved and safe. Tomorrow he would go to work on a housing project that would provide affordable homes for families like his used to be. Aurelia would continue rebuilding her company with a focus on the values that had always driven her. Sophie would go to school and dream about her future with the confidence that comes from seeing possibility instead of limitation. And they would do it all together, this family they'd built from love and crisis, and the simple decision to keep, helping each other become the best versions of themselves. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and reassuring, marking time that belonged to all of them now. And in a house filled with laughter and hope and the promise of tomorrow, three people who'd found each other when they needed it most settled into the peaceful certainty that sometimes the best stories really do begin with a stranger who needs help. All you have to do is choose to provide it.